Hi everybody, welcome back. We are at day 2 of the GEF Assembly, and we're going to kick it off with another interview in our series here at GEF Live, where we're diving into the main topics on how we manage the global commons. And today we're looking at sustainable cities and climate, and we have here Ani Dasgupta, the Global Director of the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities looks at how you can help developing countries grow their cities more sustainably while they're also addressing some of the key social and economic development issues. It's something that I think maybe has brought tension in the past, and how do we develop and how do we also conserve and look at environmental sustainability? So we'd love to hear more from your perspective. We know how important cities are to climate action, but how do we kind of address this tension, and how are the fastest growing cities in the world handling that tension? And they are facing really large development challenges. So what is your perspective on how to balance the two, both climate goals and development goals together?
I think cities are critical in this question of environment, climate, and most people in the world today already live in cities. And soon, majority of people, like 67–70% will live in cities. So getting cities right is critical for getting any of these questions we're talking about. Our work is mostly in, as you said, in developing country cities, which are growing in some parts of the world exponentially, right? And you see it everywhere. And the implication of fast growth is not being able to service it as fast. So you see congestion, you see sprawling cities. But what we have learned over the practice in the last 10–15 years is a very simple fact. For cities, actually, it's not a dichotomy with getting the climate story right and getting the development question right. If you do sensible things to make cities work, 95–99% of the time, they're actually good for climate. So I'll give you an example. So one of the things that you always see in cities, every city in Asia, every city in Africa, is congestion, right? Cars, jamming, not being able to go to work, pollution, all these things that you know, everyone knows. Actually solving that problem is to a better public transport system. More walking, more biking. That is good for getting the development part going, right? So you can go to work or you can go to school and you don't spend too much money, not get stuck. If you get to half the people in public transport, that's actually also good for climate. This story goes over and over for cities. So if you build a more compact city where you can walk, you can go to a store without getting in a car, which is easier for you, more pleasant, if there are parks for your kids to play, if it's safer. It is also actually turns out good for climate because you don't use too much carbon for getting on a car to go somewhere. So building compact cities that are walkable, bikeable, and has public transport, building that use less energy, waste that is recycled, these are all things you would do anyway if you were trying to run a sensible city, which is actually works for everyone in the city. Most of these things, that's what is wonderful about cities. That's why the world over people are focused on cities. These are not dichotomous choices. As a lot of time in climate, there's a discussion, oh my God, we have to grow or can we protect climate? For having a successful city, it's actually to protect the climate and have a successful city. Our research shows, and most of our work shows, is actually the same thing.
And I'm really a landscapes person, so I'm curious on that rural to urban interface, or how do we bring nature back into cities? Is that something that is also considered in the kind of urban planning of what a new future sustainable city would look like?
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear a landscape planner. I think both things are true. One is the relationship of the cities with this hinterland. Because cities are a center of consumption energy, consumption material. So if you don't plan properly, cities become this attraction of material from all over and not supporting the rural hinterland. So for our future to build cities, we need to not have to build cities themselves, but it's positive relation with cities. So how do we manage forests, how do we manage where food comes from, where water comes from. So that is a very important part of building a city that presents in its own region. Yeah. But it is also true inside the city. Most successful city, if you look around, think about in your mind any city that you want to be in, you will imagine that the public spaces that is accessible to everyone is a key part of the solution. Cities that don't have public places where you can't go and interact with other people, kids can't go and play, are not cities that you will think are successful cities. So we need to build cities that are walkable, that is not polluted, but people, everyone has access to open space. And one of the things that New York City did when 2010, which had a plan NYC, which you would think, oh my God, that's a very developed city, actually focused on finding a public park as a plan in every 500 yards to everyone that's available, 5-10 minutes from their house. Why? Because that is core part of quality of life in a city. Because public spaces are not only important for you to be, but it also enhances walkability of cities. And we want to enhance walkability of cities. We want to make cities more attractive to walk in, because that should be part of the mobility solution. So I think both things are very critical, and I'm very happy to hear a question from landscape planning. That's wonderful.
No, that's excellent to hear. And now I kind of want to dive into how we do that, because in the development world we talk a lot about like the enabling conditions. And in this case, I'm seeing even some examples around the world where if the national governments aren't progressive enough, cities and sub-regional governments will step up and start making their own policies and plans. So I would love to know, how much can cities really do on their own to kind of progress the climate agenda?
You know, cities can do a lot, and they're doing a lot. I mean, since Paris, you saw in the climate COP, the COP in Paris, cities came together and said, you know, we want to do what needs to be climate. And I think a lot of innovation, the wonderful part of cities is there are about 5,000 cities in the world. So the possibility of innovation is enormous, and we are seeing it. Our team works in more than 100 cities. Our colleagues in C40 work in about 92 cities they're partners with. And C40 actually did a wonderful exercise to see what can cities do themselves and what are they dependent on in national enabling, the point you made on enable. And they found, in spite of all the innovation, creativity, and leadership that comes with it, they can do about 1/3 things they need to do themselves without any intervention or anything. But the 2/3 thing is needed from national or governments beyond cities. Why is that? Because a lot of the infrastructure investment that happens in cities, even in today, comes from national government. A lot of policies, you know, almost every country, the building policies of what building, even in UK, which is a very, comes from national government legislation. Policies on how to subsidize gas comes from national government. So if you subsidize it, it increases consumption. If you don't, it decreases. So these interactions actually affect what happens in cities. Housing, most national government have huge housing program. Most of them are in cities, and that impacts in Brazil and Mexico, which has the world's biggest housing program, directly impacts what happens in cities. So I think the more of the science or evidence is showing pretty clearly what cities can do themselves, and very much what national government needs to do for helping cities to succeed. And I think what we are seeing is we need a new generation of a partnership with national government and local government. That's the session we're going to have at 2:30 we're going to talk about.
Oh, lovely. And money makes the world go round, and that's why we're all here kind of at the GEF Assemblies looking into how do we scale up investments and mobilize more funding. So low carbon infrastructure does require a major investment. How do we bridge that funding gap?
Money does go all around. Everyone in the world is talking about money, and rightly so. I think there are two big points I want to make there. One is, yes, low carbon infrastructure does have a marginally more expenditure up front. Every evidence, including papers we have produced, show that in the longer term, there is a huge amount of saving by making low carbon infrastructure. So we did a paper a couple of years back that shows if you did the infrastructure built from now, this paper was done in 2015 to 2030, if you build low carbon infrastructure, just the energy savings is $17 trillion. It's a very significant saving. So if you look at life cycle cost of infrastructure investments, low carbon infrastructure pays for itself. That's one. The second, there is a very significant infrastructure investment gap. About $1 trillion. About $4-5 trillion gets spent every year, which is a very big number, I know, globally on infrastructure. There's about $1 trillion gap to make it sustainable infrastructure. So we need to figure out a way to get more funding to sustainable infrastructure. And most research shows, to cut the long story short, local government can do some, national government can do. A lot of these funds have to come from private entities and private finance. The question is, how can we get the private finance infrastructure? And that is the work a lot of us are doing to make it more predictable, more attractive for private institutions to invest in infrastructure, which traditionally pays for itself. So normally it's a good investment, but it's not happening in the right way. The third point I want to make is actually countries spend a lot of money in infrastructure anyway.
Yeah.
Even if it's not enough, they do spend. Spending that money better can actually make a huge difference. So stop building giant flyovers and big roads and spend more money on public transport, sidewalks and bikeways. It doesn't need more money. It's the same money used differently can have a huge impact.
No, it's great to hear that there's many different options. And lastly, we just wanted to end off with a message to the young people. What advice do you have for galvanizing and kind of creating a space and a role for their action in sustainable cities?
Thank you for that question. You know, I have I have twin boys, and I see what's possible through their eyes. We can talk about infrastructure, cities, transport, and all this. Ultimately, to build a more sustainable future, more sustainable cities, we have to change our habits, how we live. It's about changing habits. It's about choosing to walk, choosing to take a bike, not choosing to take a car, choosing to take a public transport, choosing and forcing to actually recycle everything we do, not eating high carbon food. These are choices everyone has to make. It's actually changing our habits.
Yeah.
It's not just building things differently, actually living differently. And habits are difficult to change for older people. It's much easier and much more hopeful to see younger people actually establish those habits for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where young people can show, and I've seen this from my kids, that they are more eager because they see what the future is. They're more eager to shape the habits that's required for a sustainable future. And without changing the habits, all this discussion of money and cities isn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
Because if we keep living the way we're living. So my hope is that's the hope.
Yeah.
That they can actually show us the way how to live differently.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. We do have hope, and there's a lot that we can do to make a difference. So thank you, Ani, for being a part of this discussion.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, you can continue to follow our conversations for the rest of the day on the Connect for Climate Facebook page and GEF Live. So thank you.
Thank you.